Jane, can you use the microphone? We're not going to hear you otherwise.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jane Moeller. And before we dive in, I want to orient you to this wonderful space. The restrooms are out the door and behind us, as is the water fountain where you can fill up your container, and there's some cups there as well. Don't forget, be sure to enter your name for the raffle. There are little coupons on the table, and we have some really cool gifts. Winners are going to be chosen at the end of the lecture, and you must be present to win. Our program begins with a thought-provoking lecture, followed by audience questions and a brief intermission as we set up our expert panel. This promises to be an evening full of good information, lively discussion, and perhaps a little controversy. The event is proudly sponsored by the Chippewa Valley Biodiversity Partnership, the Chippewa Valley Sierra Club, the Citizen Science Center of Beaver Creek Reserve, the UWEC Student Office of Sustainability, the Biology Department at UWEC, and the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology. Now it's my privilege to introduce Eau Claire's own ornithologist and the creative mind behind tonight's event, Steve Betchkal.
Thank you, Jane. Hi, welcome everyone. This ritual is so amusing, right? A complete stranger attempts to summarize the life's work of another. 3 weeks ago, I was speaking at HorrorCon, and the host didn't even try. He stood up in front of the crowd, mic in hand, he said, "Well, what are we waiting for?" And I took that as my cue to start talking. That's not what's going to happen here, okay? I do not personally know Pete Marra, but wow, I know his work. And as someone who loves birds, I can't help but know him through his work. Go ahead, type his name into any search engine. What comes up are not dozens, but hundreds of references. Name the scientific journal he's been published in it. The American Bird Conservancy, National Wildlife Federation, Audubon, The Guardian, Nature, the Journal of Avian Biology, Smithsonian, Science, Biological Conservation, Ecology, Ecologia, the Wilson Bulletin, the Oc, the Condor, the New York Times. TV interviews, newspaper, public radio. In 2016, he published his book, Cat Wars. I first encountered him in the La Crosse Tribune, of all places. His work as a scientist is timely, pivotal, critical, and urgent. Bird flu, structure collisions, pesticides, lead poisoning, climate crisis, West Nile virus, native planting, migration, urban sprawl, alien invasives, free-roaming cats. If it touches the lives of wild birds, it is the life work of Peter Marra. Even Dr. Marra's friends couldn't adequately describe that kind of breadth and depth. That kind of impact, how could anyone? In February, I reached out to the University of Wisconsin-Madison inquiring about interest in speaking at this event for this purpose. LinkedIn, Facebook, email, no response, nothing, crickets. Ouch. Then the light bulb came on. I could ask Dr. Marra. Why not? What do I have to lose after that, right? I could simply ask the premier bird scientist in North America if he would swing by for an evening. So I did. I shot him an email, and 45 minutes later, he emailed back. Wow, is right, yeah. It's not often that a world-renowned scientist agrees to meet for an intimate evening of problem solving. And that's why we're here. As a journalist and a scientist, it's all about truth for me. Where is it? What is it? Why does it matter? As responsible human beings, we have work to do. But first, we need to get real. We need to understand what it is we're up against. We need the facts served up straight. We need guidance. Point us in the direction of reason and wisdom and justice in the world of birds and humans. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. How about you? I introduce to you Georgetown University's Peter Marra.
Steve, I just met you this afternoon, but I have a weird suspicion that we're like-minded souls, and I really am honored by that introduction. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Where to begin? I love Wisconsin, first of all. So any chance I can get to come here, I come here, in part because I so love the number of land trusts. I so love the number of groups, organic groups that sort of work on environmental issues. Yesterday I flew into Milwaukee. Anytime I have a chance to get into a wild area and natural area, I do. So I stopped in at Havenwood and walked around for 2 hours and saw some just remarkable birds. I mean, there was this movement going on. There was red-breasted nuthatches. There were a whole, I think I probably saw, and I forgot my damn binoculars. So I had to go birding naked. And so I actually, which is fun occasionally to do, it was a little frustrating, but I had a work call going on at the same time. And, but I think I probably ended up seeing probably 30 species on a work call, walking around Havenwood, and it was just a remarkable experience. And that's what I always am used to when I come to Wisconsin. There's a lot of like-minded folks, a lot of people that sort of believe in what I do. You know, that's not everybody, but I still feel it here. I think there's a long history of that here, and I'll touch upon that tonight. So thank you for having me. Looking forward to this evening. One thing I want to mention is I don't mind questions during my talk, so fire away, raise your hand, ask me a question. I like to have the discussion, I really like to have the interaction. So please, let's do that. One of the things that always amazes me is that, you know, we as humans don't spend a lot of time thinking about the non-humans. And the non-humans are moving around the planet all the time, especially during migration. You can see all of these pink tagged individual animals of all different types constantly moving around the planet. Some of these are in migrations, some of these might be in pursuit of mates, some of these are looking to forage, some of these might be escaping predators. But as we do our things on a day-to-day basis, go to a seminar, go to a movie, go to sleep, there's some sort of movement that's happening on the planet by literally trillions and trillions of animals. It's quite remarkable. A lot of it happens at night. A lot of it happens during the day. But it's pretty amazing. And it's only been somewhat recently that we've been able to start to track these animals. Maybe in the last 20 years have we really started to get geared up with more and more devices that are a little bit smaller and smaller. They're a little bit more with a price point where we can actually put them on numbers of animals where we could actually learn something about their biology. But it's really been quite remarkable over the last 20 years to see how we can really start to track many of these animals. And you can see this is a spinning Earth. It's a spinning Earth on a tilted axis that's rotating around the sun. And what that does is it sets trillions and trillions of things into cycles. And I love thinking about these fundamental cycles, these physical and biological cycles that kick so many things from biological processes like that occur at the biochemical, the cellular, the individual, and the population level into these patterns. You can think about them in terms of daylight patterns, but you can also think about them in terms of seasonal patterns. And this is what really drives enormous numbers of animals into these cycles, migration being one of them, one that possesses my mind probably 23 hours of the day. But it pushes animals from spring into summer as they move up and down the hemispheres or up and down the mountains and into fall, into spring, summer, into fall, and then into winter. And this biomass, these animals that move back and forth, it's amazing how important a phenomenon this actually is, all in pursuit of energy. And we see this in lots and lots of animals. This isn't just birds, right? We see it in monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies don't do it as a single generation, they do it across 3 generations. We were seeing some monarchs in your backyard today. The final generation that'll probably make it down to Michoacan, Mexico, in the high altitude of Michoacan and hang on those beautiful cedar trees. But we see it in fish. There's many species of fish that migrate. In fact, they introduced coho and king salmon and rainbows that are dumped into Lake Michigan. They still have a tendency to migrate even up the rivers, even though they're not spawning. They don't make it to the full life cycle, but they still have that tendency to move and migrate, driven by the physical presence of a variety of other factors. We see it in sea turtles that go off of an island and near shore and come onto islands to lay eggs and go off and come back again. They mate and do things this multiple times. These are all forms of migration and forms of movement that are just phenomenal to think about, but complicate our understanding of their biology and really introduce enormous complexities into our ability to conserve these animals as they move over larger and larger distances. Of course, birds, that's the one I'm particularly perplexed by and stuck on. most of my time. White pelicans and a whole suite of other species of birds migrate. But we also see migration in some of the largest animals that ever lived on the planet, including blue whales and humpback whales. And yes, that is an idiot kayaker right next to me. Should not be there. But whales is, that's one of the most amazing migrations. And most whales migrate, dolphins migrate, many marine mammals migrate. And most people aren't aware of this incredible natural history spectacle that happens on our planet. And we see it in wildebeest, and we also see it in bats. This is a video I took outside San Antonio. These are Mexican or Brazilian free-tail bats. They're just leaving their cave, their den site, and they're going out to forage all night. This is at dusk. You can see this large ribbon of bats and I forget the exact number, it's hundreds of thousands of bats that are in these caves. They're also outside of Austin. How many have been to some of the caves in Texas? It's one of these things you just gotta do. It's like many of these things I'm talking about, you just gotta do them. If you have any interest in natural history, this is one of the ones you have to do. These bats migrate. They migrate during the day, they go back and forth. They also migrate seasonally as they go away from the caves back into Latin America and then back up into Texas for that migration. But again, as I mentioned, we're just recently being really able to track birds and other species because of the advent of smaller and smaller and cheaper tags that we can put on the backs of animals to be able to track them and study them 24/7, almost 24/7. This is another example of a black-bellied plover. It's a project that I've been involved with in tracking as many species of North America's birds as we possibly can. This is Autumn Harrison. I hired her to run a project for me called the Migratory Connectivity Project. We've just captured a black-bellied plover on the north slope of Alaska. There was a nest right there. It had 3 eggs. And we attached a 5-gram satellite transmitter to the back of the bird and let it go. Let's watch what this bird does. It's on the Colville River Delta, again, the north slope of Alaska. Breeding has just finished. There were a pair, we caught one of the pair. It begins to move. We can start to watch the speed it moves, how much it moves. We're learning a lot about its biology. It starts to make a big jump down to Saskatchewan. This is probably in September, October. Stopping over, fattening up, and then makes a big jump. All the way down across the Gulf of Mexico, across Central America, and down to Peru, where it spends most of the non-breeding season, most of the winter, dodging jaguars, ocelots, a variety of predators, somewhat territorial over the winter. Again, remotely we're understanding the biology of this animal. And then, come March, it begins its migration north again. Stopping over in Matagorda Island, Texas. We'll be there for a couple weeks, probably with other black-bellied plovers that aren't tagged. And then pretty soon, it makes that jump right back to its exact same territory where it was the year before. There's probably enormous questions coming up in your mind about how did it do this? Where did it do that? It's an amazing thing. And that was just one bird. We've been tagging lots of birds, lots of black-bellied plovers. And look at all the different places this bird spends its non-breeding season. From Brazil to Peru to Panama to Cuba to Jamaica to Baja to Texas. And then they go back again to once again repeat the cycle and breed another year. That's the phenomenon of migration. That's what's amazing. So in North America, most of you probably know this, we have roughly 750 to 800 species of birds, regular occurring birds, not including the kelp gull, but regular occurring birds here in North America. And most of them are migratory. 70 to 75% of them are migratory. Species like swallows and ducks and tanagers and terns and orioles and grosbeaks and flycatchers and warblers and raptors. These are mostly migratory species, which is just, it's just remarkable when you think about the diversity of places they go, the diversity of spots that they need to survive. They're only here in the United States, most of these species, for 2 to 4 months of the year. It's actually in the tropics, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, Central America, South America, where they spend the majority of the annual cycle. So we know relatively little about most of the annual cycle for these remarkable species. I want to go through just a few of these and explain to you what we're facing with these migratory species. This is a cerulean warbler. It's one of the most remarkable birds just in terms of its color. And just recently, there have been folks that have started to study where these birds go. Now, let me make sure you understand, this is migratory connectivity, where breeding populations migrate and then where they winter, but populations. We understand the general species range. We know the general breeding range, and we know the general migration area, and we know the general area where they spend the non-breeding area. But these different populations may be going to very different places. For example, can you see that light? Can you see this? These eastern populations pretty much go straight south, and they're segregated from these western populations. And the midwestern populations are segregated from all of these. They don't even overlap. These are tags that are called light level geolocators. We put the really light, you put them on the back of the bird, and it records light and time of day. There's a little sensor on the back of the tag, and you catch the bird the next year, and you can actually see the data that's archived in this tag, the light that this bird has been exposed to. And by knowing the light, you can actually determine geographically where these birds were in terms of their latitude, not their longitude as well. You can see longitude, but you can't do it as well. This is a recent development. It's probably been the last 12, 13 years that we've been able to use these tags. But you've got to recapture the bird and get the tag back to get the data. So you automatically lose about half of the birds because they die. 50% of these warblers will die. And it's not always easy to recapture the birds again. In fact, it's a major pain in the in the keister. And so, but the data are ridiculously incredible. I mean, if you just look at that information. So the other thing about the cerulean warbler is that we're losing cerulean warblers on our watch. So in the last 50 years, 75% of cerulean warblers have disappeared. That means 3 out of 4 birds are now gone. Right? Their populations are just plummeting. Let's look at another one. Rusty blackbird, one of my favorites. I like the brown and the black birds. I'll just say that right out there. I like the cerulean ones too, but I just love rusty blackbirds. Just a remarkable species. There are 2 sort of separate populations of rusty blackbirds. They're single species. There's a rusty blackbirds that breed up in the boreal of Alaska, and then there's another group that breeds in the Northeast, in Maine and southern Quebec. And you can see there are 2 different migration paths. We used, again, archival tags on this species. This is a project I led and was engaged in. The problem is with rusty blackbirds, 90% decline in the last 40 or 50 years. That means 9 out of 10 birds are no longer present. Big decline. It doesn't get any better. This is red knots. The red knot, another remarkable species, a shorebird. We've been tracking these birds with a variety of types of tags. There are 3 different subpopulations. This is the eastern subpopulation. They're known because they do this remarkable migration from the high Arctic all the way down to the southern tip of South America and Tierra del Fuego. And again, we've tagged them with a variety of tools. Lots of my colleagues have been working on the species trying to figure out a lot of the biology. They're known in particular in the eastern US for this remarkable thing that happens. Again, this is another one of the things you got to jot down. You got to go see this. Full moon in May, the Delaware Bay, you have this amazing horseshoe crab congregation that happens, this spawning, and you get the rack along the beaches that just loads up. It used to load up more than it does now, unfortunately, but lots and lots of horseshoe crab eggs, and you get this incredible concentration of shorebirds that time their migration and their stopover with this remarkable horseshoe crab spawning that happens. The knots are part of this. And it's an important piece because of the whole migration puzzle in the spring, because they fatten up. People have studied this. They fatten up, and this helps them make this huge jump up to the high Arctic. And we know from studies that if they don't fatten up enough, they will die en route. So they will not be able to make that migration. And so unfortunately, what we're seeing, there's been a lot of harvesting of horseshoe crabs for a variety of things, for pet food. The blood has been harvested for a variety of medical uses. Apparently they don't do that as much, but they still harvest the horseshoe crabs for pet food, and the number of horseshoe crabs has declined precipitously. And so red knots, unfortunately, we've seen a 95% decline of red knots over the last 40 or 50 years as well. Folks, we're losing the epic migrations of birds. We're losing many migrations, not just in North America, also throughout the world. In general, it's about a 50% decline. I'll go into some of this in some detail, but we're losing many of these migrations. And this isn't new. History repeats itself. We've seen many of these sorts of things, these declines in birds before, and we've been able to step in and save many of these species. Not always, but in many of these cases we have. One of the cases where we were not successful, of course, is with the passenger pigeon. But it is important that we look back in history to understand today. And I think we should do that in all cases, not just with biology. With our current situation, we should absolutely do this to understand the trajectories that we're on. So with the passenger pigeon, they were quite abundant in the early 1800s. It's thought to be one of the most abundant species in North America. People would see massive ribbons of passenger pigeons flying through the sky, particularly well-known species in Wisconsin, of course. But we had a very large enslaved population that needed to be fed. We had a civil war where we had soldiers that needed to be fed. And this all led to an over-harvesting of passenger pigeons. And ultimately, the last passenger pigeon died in 1914 at the Cincinnati Zoo on September 1st. At the Cincinnati Zoo. We also lost the Carolina parakeet and a variety of other, there's a pulse of extinctions that happened around that time. It's really unfortunate, obviously, to say the least. A little bit later in the 1920s, 1930s, we were also known, and not just here, but also in Europe, the harvesting of egrets and herons for their phyloplumes. You can see in the middle here, the great egret with its breeding plumage, this beautiful phyloplume. Well, that phyloplume was, they were collecting them because they liked them to put on hats. Believe it or not, it was for fashion. And so there was a massive over-harvesting that was going on, and many of these species of herons and egrets were close to extinction. It was during the Teddy Roosevelt presidency, and Teddy Roosevelt basically was a well-known conservationist, and he put some legislation known as the Neotropical Migratory Bird Act, and that was all harvesting and hunting of egrets and herons stopped, and no species of herons and egrets went extinct because of that legislation. The same is true in Europe. There's similar sorts of legislation that was put in place there. And so when you remove the threat, we've seen this over and over again, species will come back. Nature is resilient. That is the good news. Nature is resilient once given the chance. We know that's the case. History tells us that. Of course, another case of where we saw environmental crises is with DDT. In fact, a lot of the initial accounts of what was going on with DDT initially in the 1940s, 1950s, right here in Wisconsin, people were reporting dead robins, lots of other dead songbirds in their yards, but it was really peregrine falcons, bald eagles, brown pelicans, ospreys, and a variety of other species that were sitting on scrambled eggs because DDT interrupts the calcium deposition of eggs, and there was zero reproductive success, not just mortality, but zero reproductive success from a lot of high-order predators like those species I just mentioned, and it got people's attention. And it was really this remarkable book that we're all familiar with, I'm sure, here, Silent Spring, probably the most important environmental book, if not one of the top 2 or 3 environmental books to really enlighten and communicate complex scientific topics to other non-scientists. Rachel Carson was an incredibly gifted science communicator, and she brought this complex topic to the public in a really important way. In fact, it was also Gaylord Nelson, the governor of Wisconsin, who was also pivotal in bringing this to Congress and bringing this to the attention of the United States legislators, and were able to sort of step in and stop this whole process of spraying DDT around the US. We still use DDT in small pockets. There are still other countries that use DDT, but this is absolutely a success story in many, many ways. This ended up not only creating something called the Endangered Species Act, which is still in place. Let's hold our breath on that one. And it has saved many, many species, including the ones from DDT. No species went extinct because of DDT. Species were very close, but no species went extinct because of DDT. That's a really important lesson. Earth Day, Gaylord Nelson, again, founder of Earth Day from Wisconsin. That was all related to this whole process and that fight against corporate America, against the ravages of how companies can be, through their dollars, could drive like pesticide use in the United States. That was fought off by a book and by some really caring and committed individuals. It was really an important thing to go back and think about and look at. So we avoided the fate of the passenger pigeon. It was really an essential piece of our history that we need to remember. Anyone know who this is? This is Chandler Robbins. Chandler Robbins wrote one of the first golden guides to birds. He was a USGS scientist, US Fish and Wildlife scientist. I think USGS, maybe US Fish and Wildlife, they switched at some point. But he was actually at Patuxent Wildlife Research Center and overlapped a bit with Rachel Carson, and they spent time talking to one another about how we needed to put monitoring schemes in place to really understand how different perturbations, whether it's DDT or it's climate or whatever it happens to be, we were monitoring these things. And so he started something called the Breeding Bird Survey. In the red here, that is percent change of songbirds. But he started the Breeding Bird Survey data, and it's actually turned out to be a pivotal and really critical and probably one of the best ways and scientific monitoring systems in the world for a group of species, a complex species like this. And in 1989, there was another pivotal moment where people took the BBS data for the first time. It was Chandler Robbins, it was a guy I worked with, Ross Greenberg, who's no longer with us, Sam Droege and John Sauer, did an analysis of songbirds, Nearctic, neotropical migrants, so primarily songbirds, and looked at what was going on with their trends using the Breeding Bird Survey data. It was really one of the first peer-reviewed papers that did this. They published it in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 1989. Excuse me. But it really kicked up a lot of alarm, similar to these other pivotal crises in time. And John Terborg wrote a popular book called Where Have All the Birds Gone? It was a really important book. On the heels of this, the Migratory Bird Center was put in place at the Smithsonian, which I eventually led. And ABC was started, American Bird Conservancy, Partners in Flight, another group that was started. Again, think about all these different crises I've talked about. Pivotal things can emerge from these various crises. It's a critical time for us to sort of step up and respond to these issues. So in 2012, I started thinking that given all that's happened since 1989, we need to go back and look at not just these songbirds and Nearctic, neotropical migrants. 25 years later, we need to sort of reassess what we saw in the 1989 paper and other species as well, from ducks to shorebirds, etc., and see how conservation is working. How are these different mechanisms that we put in place, how are they working at saving North America's birds? So we looked at net population change, we actually came up with a way to look at the number of birds. And we did this by different taxa across different habitats. And we published this paper in 2019 in Science. And what we found was, when we used not just Breeding Bird Survey data, I should say, we also used Christmas bird count data, duck count data, shorebird count data, everything that was out there. We've perfected our abilities to count birds. Now we use eBird data to count birds. We can actually look at status and trends using eBird data. So we've got, again, so many ways to really keep our finger on the pulse around the canaries that are in the coal mine, which is essentially what we're doing. And unfortunately, the news isn't good. You've probably seen these statistics before. What we determined was that actually, despite all the conservation that we've done, despite things like the Endangered Species Act, and the Neotropical Migratory Bird Act, and Partners in Flight, and the Migratory Bird Center, and the American Bird Conservancy, and all these efforts, most species are still declining, and in some cases, they're declining worse. There's a net population loss of about 3 billion birds since 1970. 29%, roughly 30% loss of abundance across the North American avifauna. It's about 57% of all species are in decline in North America. Folks, that's on our watch. This is us. This is our responsibility. If we don't do something about this, we're complicit in this issue. We're losing species. Future generations will not have the ability to enjoy birds just like we are enjoying birds. That does not make me feel good. That's our responsibility. And I was present in 1989 when that paper came out. I was at the Woods Hole Biological Marine Center, and there was a big get together with probably 100 of my closest bird colleagues. I was just a kind of a peon grad student at the time, but I was hanging around all these other giants in ornithology, and they reported on this 1989 paper, and one of the things they said was, let's commit to keeping common birds common. That's what the commitment was in 1989. I think if they had left that place and they were going to get a tattoo, it would have been a tattoo that said, let's keep common birds common. Unfortunately, the other thing we found in this paper was that most of the 3 billion birds that we were losing were the common birds. Most of the rare birds were already rarer, and that we were losing species that were once very abundant, like dark-eyed juncos, savanna sparrows, red-winged blackbirds. Turns out blackbirds in general, crashing, probably because of over-harvesting in Louisiana, Arkansas, southeastern United States, which is where a lot of these birds spend the non-breeding season, but they also feed on sunflower seed farms, ironically, and there are kill permits for taking large numbers, hundreds of thousands of these species, of these individuals every year. Most people don't hear about that, but that's what happens, and they're probably killing rusty blackbirds, red-winged blackbirds. Now even cowbirds are not as common as they used to be. So we're now losing common species, and there have been a couple of recent papers in high-profile journals that have reported the same thing with independent data sets. We're not just losing common species, we're losing them in their centers of abundance, where they were once very abundant. So part of the issue here is that we know that habitat loss is probably a big deal, but if we were to say, let's save this piece of habitat or that piece of habitat, it would probably have negligible effects. We need to be much more surgical in how we approach these things. And we haven't been able to really identify what's causing the declines in most cases. And this is in part because we haven't been able to follow these birds like that black-bellied plover, right? We haven't been able to identify where the threats are that are driving species declines down. So if you don't know where individuals or populations spend the year, you don't know the reasons for their decline. And if you don't know the reasons for their decline, there's no way you can mitigate those declines. There's no way you can actually go through the challenging issues of working with people to come get them on board to remove the threat, whatever the threat might be. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a simple algorithm that we need to get in our head. You really need to understand what's causing the decline. Like DDT, remove DDT, birds come back. Pretty straightforward. Hunters shooting birds for feathers, stop the hunting, birds come back. That is the good news here, is that nature is resilient. And I'm going to say that over and over again. Nature is resilient. Once you remove those threats, the populations will rebound. So let's look a little bit at what these drivers of decline likely are, and then let's sort of examine what we really can do and how we have to do it. It's a complex process. It definitely is a complex process. So what are the drivers of decline? Well, there's no doubt at all that one of the biggest drivers is going to be habitat loss. This is absolutely the biggest driver, no question about it. But there's never one issue in anything. If we were looking at human health and we were only going to focus on one health issue, where would we be? It just doesn't make any sense. This is a constant criticism I get when I start to talk about some of these other lesser known threats. It's like, well, no, but habitat loss is the biggest one. Yeah, but that doesn't mean we don't also deal with the other ones too, right? So habitat loss is absolutely an important one, probably for agricultural intensification. Urban sprawl, tropical deforestation, there's all sorts of reasons why. When I flew here, every time I get in a plane, I'm just amazed when I fly from DC to someplace like Milwaukee or to Los Angeles, wherever it happens to be. You look down, the amount of natural habitat that's gone is just incredible to me. We have changed our entire landscape. We've converted it to not good bird habitat. So this is a form of indirect mortality, right? So we're removing the habitat, so birds can't breed, birds can't survive. It's not necessarily direct mortality. There's also human-caused direct mortality, or direct anthropogenic mortality, which is a sort of another category that we need to think about when we think about minimizing the mortality of birds, or any species for that matter. Excuse me 1 second. Any questions yet? Happy to take them. So the first one I'm going to talk about are the impacts of non-native species, and I'll talk about this from a variety of perspectives. This is a topic that I got into sort of accidentally. I started a program at the Smithsonian in 2000 called Neighborhood Nest Watch, because I was really, I love color banding birds and watching individual birds. I love watching individual birds over multiple years. Oopsies, this keeps on jumping for some reason. And so I created, when I moved to DC, it occurred to me I'd spent my entire life trying to get away from people and going to the most remote places I possibly could on the planet. Like I did my master's in really remote Peru. I would go to the White Mountains of New Hampshire. You know, I still love getting to these areas, but when I moved to Washington, DC, it was like, oh Jesus, I guess I gotta work with people. And I guess I gotta work in urban areas, because urban areas are gonna become more and more common. And if you wanna understand sort of the conservation issues, you should probably immerse yourself. So I created a program where we go into people's yards, Smithsonian scientists, me and field assistants, grad students, and with homeowners, catch birds and color band them. So we chose like 8 species, and we color band these birds, and we taught the homeowners how to be a biologist, how to be an ornithologist. And they would watch their color banded bird, they'd see their cardinal, red over orange aluminum, and they'd see that bird, you know, every year. And it's amazing, where it was a Carolina wren, or it was a house wren, or it was a song sparrow. And they'd all call us. It's like, I saw it again, it's amazing, it's the most amazing thing ever. I get it, I totally get it. But then we also taught them how to find their nests. And when you start doing that, that's survivorship data. And that's reproductive success. And they would enter the data online. We were eventually able to show that the data that they collected was as good as the data we collected. So I stopped the program. No, I didn't stop the program. And so we actually ran that program for 20 years. We ran the program, we actually expanded it out from Florida to Atlanta, to Raleigh, North Carolina, to Pittsburgh, to Amherst. So we had multiple sites. It was on an urban to suburban gradient in each of these individual locations. But it gave us an opportunity to sort of dig deeper into this private property that occurred in these cases. And we looked at things like butyrated flame retardants, and how these flame retardants and lead and cadmium and other contaminants work their way into these food webs and into birds in these systems, from humans and their houses and their tires and their water or their paint. And so we got a lot of insights there. We looked at West Nile virus in these settings. As West Nile virus came in, we looked at Lyme disease, we looked at avian influenza, we looked at a whole suite of different things. I think we published probably 60 papers just from neighborhood nest watch studies that were going on there. But we also started to sort of track birds and their nestlings, put radio tags on their nestlings. There was a point to this long story. And we started to realize that most of the nestlings from this one species in particular, cats, were getting eaten by catbirds. The catbird nestlings, once they fledged, they were getting nailed by cats. And a lot of our adults were getting eaten by cats as well. So we started to realize, as we started to think about predation in the system, that it was actually a non-native predator that was taking most of these cats, most of these birds. And so I started to sort of think again about the issues in urban and suburban settings. And then I started to sort of move more into looking at the influences of cats. And that sort of put me on a different trajectory that I would never look back on, because we started to look at, with a postdoc, Scott Loss, we started to look at all the studies, and I realized there's been a lot of research on this topic where people look at everything from the number of dead animals that cats bring in for owned cats, so cats that are let outside and they come back in and they bring all kinds of presents, to unowned cats, and when you have unowned cats, you can have unowned cats that are sort of part of a colony that might be at a trap neuter return colony, or you've got a really caring individual that loves animals just like I love animals, but they happen to be focused on cats, and they feed those cats in a colony, and so we can keep track of how many animals that they kill. And then there's also truly feral animals that have no dependence on humans whatsoever. And what we determined from all these studies, we basically built a model, and we're able to say that, well, according to all these papers, when you look at all these papers, cats kill somewhere between 1.3 and 4 billion birds a year. There's a huge range there. That's because there's a lot of range in these different studies. Some cats kill a lot of birds, some cats don't kill birds. There's also the number. It's really challenging to estimate the numbers of cats that are in nature. It's really pretty easy to estimate the number of owned cats that are let outside, but it's really hard to estimate the number of, say, feral cats. It's a very tricky thing. So that's the reason why there's 1.3 to 4 billion, enormous range. But still, 1.3, it's a lot of freaking birds. And then if you look at mammals, 12.3 billion mammals a year are estimated. This is from data. This is assembled and built. We built a model from this. We'll talk about this some more. West Nile virus is another disease a non-native invasive disease that came in probably through some facet of globalization, probably a mosquito. West Nile virus was endemic to Africa and Europe, and it probably came in a mosquito that was carried over by a plane. We don't know exactly what happened. First showed up in New York City. Dead crows started showing up. It's transferred by mosquitoes, primarily Culex pipiens, and they bite a crow dies. A colleague of mine at the Bronx Zoo first isolated it from a crow, and then it began to spread. It spread south. We were actually tracking it. We discovered it. We tracked it as it moved down the US into Jamaica, into Mexico, into Cuba. We were the first ones to really track the movement of West Nile virus. And then we eventually asked, well, what are the population consequences of West Nile virus on bird populations? Because diseases are known to have massive impacts on population size and populations. Malaria in Hawaii being one of the most devastating that's actually caused species extinctions. And there's many scholars out there that think that diseases over time have really been responsible for driving the distribution of animals. What we're able to show here, this is a postdoc Shannon Ledoux. Over time, the x-axis, you can see this year and total number of birds on the y-axis. As you go from the eastern United States west, you can see the dip in the numbers of birds on the BBS counts after they were exposed to West Nile virus. So there was a severe population hit on many species, especially American crows, but also blue jays and a whole suite of species, some of which have come back, but not all of them. Non-native plants, of course, the horticultural industry has had a really massive impact on our native plants in North America. And this is devastating, in part because we've removed all of the insects that have co-evolved with native plants. So as we remove the native plants, we also remove the insects. And when you remove the insects, you start to impact how energy flows through these systems and the available energy that might be in place for species like birds. And when you do that, it causes all sorts of problems. So many of you are probably familiar with Doug Talamay. Doug Talamay is a colleague of mine, and we had a study at my neighborhood nest swat sites where we looked at yards that were planted mostly in native species and yards that were planted mostly in non-native, but it was a gradient. This was done by a PhD student, Desiree Narango. And basically what we were able to show with using Carolina chickadee is at about 30%, if you have 30% native, your chickadees are gonna produce young that will replace their population over time. So those are called sources. If you have about 70% or more non-native plants, you're probably gonna be a sink. So your chickadees and other species are not gonna have enough food to actually produce enough young to maintain the population size of that species in that yard. So 70% native is sort of the target that we were able to show for at least chickadees, but it's probably a good number for a variety of other species. So one of the reasons we wanted to do this, to look at all of these various studies, and then we did more literature searches on every other study that's been done on a variety of other sources of direct anthropogenic mortality, is because frankly, I wanted to know what I should focus on. I wanted to know, is it wind turbines? Is that what I should be focusing on if I'm really gonna tackle one of these threats and take that baton and try to make a difference for birds and other wildlife? Or is it windows? What does it happen to be? And this is what we did. This summarized all the data. What would you focus on? I mean, honestly, cats by far, 2.4 billion birds a year on average relative to windows and buildings. That's about 1 billion, but that number's probably maybe 800,000 a year. Wind turbines, I'm not suggesting that wind turbines it's not important to keep our eyes on those. It absolutely is. But wind turbines, we can place them in certain places where they're not going to be as impactful. We can change their height. We can stop them from turning at certain times of year. And we know we need to deal with the fossil fuel issue. We cannot keep combusting carbon into the air. We just absolutely cannot do that. Wind turbines absolutely have to be part of the equation, as does solar and a variety of other things. I'm not saying we still don't have a good handle on offshore wind in terms of the impacts that it can have, but we need to explore it. It's really hard to do mortality estimates at offshore because birds don't float. And if they do, they go somewhere else. And that also does not incorporate sort of the multiple and interacting components here. And I'm sure many of these threats interact with one another. And then they're also exacerbated by climate change, things like drought, that are also probably having impacts. But none of the declines that we're seeing right now can we actually pinpoint to climate change, at least in North America. I have some suspicions that some things are going on, but for the most part, it's a difficult thing to put our finger on. So it's clear there are some serious issues here that we have to respond to. But how do we respond to many of these threats? How do we think about these declines and knowing that they're not new, knowing that if we can actually motivate, communicate, and change people's approaches and attitudes, we could potentially do a lot to save these birds, because the alarm is on. And so my colleague and I that worked on that science paper, Ken Rosenberg, and I tried to really think about what we needed to do to reimagine bird conservation, because it wasn't really working. And we came up with an idea to create something called the Road to Recovery. And the Road to Recovery is really a species-focused effort. It's really, we like to think of it as a movement to bring together both natural science, but also social science, to identify where the limiting, come on in, it's all right, the limiting factors are if we were to be surgical in our approach and we were able to say, this is where we need to save habitat, or this is where we need to do this for this bird. That's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your hard to get conservation dollars. It is hard to raise money for the research. It's really hard to raise money for the conservation. It's just extremely difficult. I do it all. That's what I spend my time doing, and it's one of the hardest things that you can possibly do. So we are busy trying to think about the real actionable co-produced science that we can do to save birds. And we're focusing on really understanding what are the priority species are that we need to focus on. And we've come up with this category called the tipping point species. So the primary time when we start to do some conservation is when a species becomes listed as threatened or endangered. But once it becomes threatened or endangered, you're probably familiar with the Kirtland's warbler. You're probably familiar, which has been delisted, and another success story. Most recently, the sage grouse. These species become extremely contentious, right? It's not a good conversation to have across the aisle. They get closer to extinction, and it becomes extremely expensive. The sage grouse, I think there was about $400 million that was put towards saving the sage grouse. So our strategy is like, what's that next set of species? We're calling the tipping point species that are sort of spiraling towards that listing consideration. It's at that point that we need to sort of step in, bring in the best new science. We can now track birds. We now have models that we can actually build that are complex, full annual cycle models to sort of understand where limiting factors might be occurring. And we can actually develop and understand much better what the specific threats are, so where we can say, yeah, it's X, Y, or Z. So we started this, and I'm going to give you an example. The yellow-billed cuckoo is a species that I am working on with a postdoc, now a faculty member at LSU. She's moving there in December, Callie Stanley. Most of this is work that she did. Yellow-billed cuckoos are a species that once existed across the entire United States. Look at the map up here. There was a western subspecies that's pretty much gone now. There's still pockets in the Southwest. This species, this is now the subspecies is federally listed. But even in the east, the yellow-billed cuckoo is a rapidly declining species. But we really didn't know much about the species, honestly. It's a very hard bird to watch. It's a very hard bird to track. But because these tags have gotten smaller, we're able to deploy 2-gram satellite tags on these cuckoos. And this blue area here, that was thought to be the winter range of yellow-billed cuckoos. Pretty large area, huh? Well, once we started to put on satellite tags, let's see if this works. Oops, didn't work quite right. Let's see if it kicks in. Let's watch for just a moment. There it is. They're coming back. You can see these are tracks from the west. I know when I turn my head, my mic, I lose the mic. There you go. See, birds from the west are coming down here. Birds from the east are coming down here. We've in total tracked around 80 yellow-billed cuckoos. This only represents around 15 or 20. This is an early animation that we did. But the amazing thing is that all these cuckoos go to that little blue area. That's actually the non-breeding area of yellow-billed cuckoos. That's a much more restricted area. And it turns out the western ones go to the southern part of that blue box, and the eastern ones go primarily to the northern part of that little blue box. Well, in that area, that's northern Paraguay, northern Argentina, and southern Bolivia. This is known as the Gran Chaco. It is one of the most remarkable places on the planet. It's second only to like the Amazon in terms of its importance for biodiversity in South America. It's also known as the Green Hell. I wouldn't go there when cuckoos are there. It's a miserable place in terms of the heat and the bugs. But there's the cat diversity there is remarkable. The good cat diversity is remarkable. It's just an amazing place. But what's also happening there is massive deforestation, primarily because of Mennonites. Mennonites have moved there. They've been moving there from Canada and also Germany years ago, and they've been growing soybeans and cutting down a massive amounts of native forest for cattle grazing. It's been a big, big problem. And it's been written about a lot in the popular press. So again, you can sort of see the same stories are happening over and over again, whether it's Rachel Carson or it's these sorts of various crises that have happened, but still we have not yet fixed the problem here. But with the yellow-billed cuckoo, it's a good example of what we're trying to do with road to recovery, in that we're trying to identify threats using the best science and also social science, because remember, we can't get away from the humans. And the humans are causing the problem, but we need to include them into the equation if we're going to solve this problem. We just have to. With cuckoos, we're now starting to dig in and trying to figure out how best to save habitat on the ground to protect yellow-billed cuckoos. It's a tricky and not an easy thing to solve. But I think there's still things that we can all do, each one of us. There's a whole series of things that we have to keep aware of. And this is when our paper came out, we came up with the sort of these 7 simple things, 7 simple actions that we really want people to keep on the forefront of their mind that they can do to save birds. The first one, because again, it's one of the biggest threats that's out there after habitat loss, is to keep cats indoors. And if you don't have cats, but your neighbors do, preach the gospel. People need to be educated. Many people don't understand the issues with cats. It's a very complex issue. Cats also need to be enriched, just like with your dog owner. You need to throw the ball for your dog. You need to walk your dog. You need to enrich that animal's life. The same thing is true for cats. Any animal that you have, any pet you have, they need enrichment activities. They just do. So having a catio is a wonderful solution for letting your cat outside so it's safe and animals are safe. You can also walk your cat on a leash. Lots of people walk their cat. In fact, I've seen definitely a huge increase in the number of people that are walking their cats on leashes in Hartland. In fact, there's one right here. Bells, no. Bibs, no. That does not stop a tire from hitting your cat, because that's the other reason to leave your cats inside, and not just opening the door and letting them run, because they are definitely in danger of getting preyed upon by coyotes or any other eagles, whatever it happens to be, or getting hit by cars, which is the #1 way cats actually die. That's for owned cats. The unowned cats that's a bigger issue, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is a serious issue. There are problems with unowned feral cats in at least 40 national parks in the U.S. It is a tremendous problem, and there aren't a lot of solutions that work. Trap, neuter, return absolutely does not work. So we need to talk about the cat issue. We need to this was one of the reasons I absolutely accept this invitation, because I want to talk about this issue. We have to talk about it. Windows, this is a big issue as well, window collisions. But this is one we actually can do something about. There's all sorts of things you can do to windows, whether it's large buildings or it's in your home. You can actually put up a variety of things on your windows. If you have a window that happens to kill birds, you can actually put lines on it. There's all kinds of things you can buy. You can modify those windows. Don't put your feeder next to your window. Make sure you put it somewhere away from your house. If you are part of a survey in a town where you have large glass buildings, if there isn't one, start one. Try to understand which buildings are the big bird killers in your community. Get those towns to turn off the lights during migration. Again, these are behavioral modifications that we can do. You save money. Turns out if a building turns its lights off at night, they save energy. And you can actually you can calculate and quantify how much money is saved by turning those lights off at night, just during the periods of migration. That would do wonders. And again, there's now legislation, Bird Safe Windows Act, that's been passed. And so now buildings in certain towns are being forced to modify their windows. McCormick Place in Chicago was one of the worst offenders, and they finally just, after a massive die-off 2 years ago, I think, they've changed their windows, they've modified it, and guess what? No more bird kills, or a lot fewer. We need to reduce lawn, plant native species. I just explained, why that is. Those insects that are part of those plants that damage the leaves, that's all good. We want damaged leaves on our plants. That's a healthy thing, as long as it's not emerald ash borer. And there's a lot of really good damaged insects that are damaging those plants that birds depend on. And these are beautiful landscapes that you can actually create in your yards through native plantings. It's an essential piece of it. Pesticides, just say no to pesticides. We just should not be using pesticides. Forget about Roundup. These things have horrible impacts, not just on native wildlife, on your pets, on your kids, on you. We just can't be spraying contaminants into our natural areas. It's the silliest thing. Don't put fertilizer on your lawn. After you get rid of your lawn, get rid of that fertilizer. We shouldn't be doing any of this. This all gets back into water, gets into our systems. We need to avoid all this. These are the simple things that we can avoid and we can educate others around. It's a really important thing to do. There's also things you can do to buy in the marketplace. Bird-friendly coffee was something that Russ Greenberg at the Migratory Bird Center started, that I actually managed for several years. Coffee, of course, can be grown in a shade environment. The coffee plants evolved in a shade environment, and when coffee is grown in a 70% canopy environment, like a shade environment, it is actually producing habitat. That's actually habitat that's good for birds and good for coffee. And you can actually look for the Smithsonian bird-friendly certification and buy coffee that's actually, producing food for a lot of people out there, and also producing habitat, keeping habitat in a permanent agricultural way that's maintaining habitat for birds. Finally, or not quite yet, finally, plastics. We need to stop using plastics, our dependence on plastic. Another issue that we can actually change. Plastics are not good for most wildlife. They ingest the plastic. It kills a lot of birds. Seabirds, in fact, it's primarily not plastics that are driving seabird declines. It's actually non-native rodents and cats on most islands that are driving the declines of seabirds by far. But plastics are also a problem. It's just the pictures are so stunning. But there's all kinds of problems with nanoplastics, microplastics, and macroplastics when it comes to our environment and our own health. So these are simple things that impact both of us. Finally, the other thing that I think it's 7, but it could easily be first, and that is education. And we are lucky enough to watch birds and love watching birds. And educating more and more people about the wonders of watching birds, whether it's using eBird or using Merlin or just taking kids out birding. This is our responsibility to repair that ecological connection that so many people have lost with nature. This is fundamental. If you're not connected to nature, if you don't really understand why nature's important, your own place in natural ecosystems, I wouldn't expect you to value it. So that's why it's my job to sort of make sure people are connected to nature. If you don't really understand that we are part of it, why would you value it? Why would you vote for it? And so I feel like across the United States, across the world, we've lost this fundamental connection to nature that is so critically important to not only maintaining the planet for our health, but more importantly, the thing that really crushes me is these future generations that have equal rights to understanding and appreciating the nature that we've had access to. And we have a job to make sure that we maintain this, not for us. It's not just about us. And guess what? After we die, the world doesn't just end. Although it may now, I don't know, Jesus. But there will be more people here. It's not about us. I'm done. I'm pretty much done. It's about everyone that comes after me. And it's our responsibility to make sure we're continuing to maintain the integrity of this natural planet for future generations. And it's not just about the individual actions. That's just the start. We need to vote. We need to make sure we're continuing to push broad-scale changes. This is obviously the Recovering America's Wildlife Act is not going to happen for the next 3 years. That's clear. But we need to think about the next thing that we're going to try to get, to scale things up, to get through Congress, to scale things up so we can do the sorts of things, not only in the United States, but we also need to continue to think beyond our borders. And we are one world. We are one environment. That's how we have to approach this. It's not just about the United States. It's about everywhere on the planet. And I know I talk a lot about these individual species threats, but it is essential that we continue to protect and restore habitats. Habitat is obviously really important, but it has to be part of the equation, and we have to continue pushing that in every way we possibly can. And just because our federal government may not be stepping up now, it is important at the state, at the county, at the town level. All these municipalities are essential. The decisions that happen there are essential. The first Trump administration pretty much ended punishment for bird deaths. That was started by Teddy Roosevelt in the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act is not done. It's probably done for the next 3 years, but we need to make sure we sort of reinforce that in 3 years and bring it back, because it lasted for a long time and it did a lot of good. We need to bring it back to make sure that it is strong legislation protecting all birds in the United States and Canada and Mexico. So I hope you agree with me. Migratory birds are just remarkable animals, as are resident species. Don't get me wrong, I love the resident ones too. I'm just somehow fixated by migration. But they need protection. They're slipping through the cracks. Protected areas by themselves do not save species that move over large distances. In fact, it's thought that most migratory species in North America use about 7% of protected areas during their entire life cycle. So protected areas are important, but they're not sufficient. Most of these species are declining. We have some of the most robust, rigorous data out there showing these declines. Multiple independent data sets demonstrate this. We have new conservation out there. We have to use it. We have to sort of assess what we've done, accept the fact that it's not always working, and we need to sort of reimagine how we're doing conservation. And we have to think not beyond the biological sciences and incorporate the social sciences. This is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned over my career, is that it is about the people in many ways. I love focusing on the birds, not thinking about the human equation, but I've learned I gotta think about the human equation. That it is the social sciences that really have to be brought to bear to these challenges if we're gonna solve these problems. We need to study the people and understand why they are acting or why they aren't acting. If we don't do that, we're not gonna be able to pull the right levers. That's pretty straightforward. And of course, something that I've always known, and I've always taken seriously, engaging the public around nature, it's really essential to conservation. We have to do it. Anyone who likes to watch birds, it's your job to go out there and help other people understand why birds are important. Or whatever their switch is. It might be salamanders, or it might be through art, or it might be through the humanities. Figure out what the switch is. Flip that switch. Help them flip that switch. Maybe it's reading Margaret Atwood or whoever it happens to be through birds. It's all of our jobs to be the ambassadors to introduce nature and the wonders of nature to more and more people out there. Thanks very much. I'm glad to take some questions.